Coming up on Mount Hermeneutics, women pastors. Should that be a thing? Well, you're definitely going to get our take, so keep it right here. You're listening to Mount Hermeneutics, where three Marines give their perspective on God, faith, and spirituality with a heavy lean on the divine council worldview. This is not your grandma's Sunday school, nor is it always for the Christian faint of heart. Nothing about who we are or what we say make us experts. But you better believe we'll have a take, and perhaps it won't suck.
You guys have been friends so long and you don't know what his eschatological view is?
I don't know what anybody's eschatological view is because I hate eschatology, which is
That's-
part of the
That's
part
the
of the
first
show.
thing I ask people when I meet them. If I can't already tell, that is.
That could be a reason why you're single.
Normally, you know what? The right one will have the right eschatology.
Remember that Mount Hermeneutics is free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube, simply by searching for Mount Hermeneutics. And if it's your first time with us, I am Andre. That's Brian. That's Matt. Fellas, what's happening?
So, what's going on?
Another
I
President's Day, huh?
it's all a mess behind me. You might notice my background looks different.
I don't see David Robinson.
Right? He's in front of me now. We had to have our floors redone.
That sounds sus, Matt. I don't know. Why is he in front of you? Like,
It's better than behind me.
I mean, he is a big dude.
But I had to have my floors in the house redone. And so everything had to be taken out and put back in. And I kind of took the opportunity to rearrange my office / studio. So I haven't decided how to do all of this back here. So this is going to look different for a couple more shows probably. I thought about like hurrying this afternoon and trying to get it all fixed for the show. And I was like, nah. So
yeah,
that's what you get, which is better than the hotel background of last week.
The tens of you would be like, what's going on, man?
Tens and tens of viewers would be like, something changed.
And you on Spotify listening right now, and be like, man, I gotta click over to the video. I gotta see what these cats are talking about.
It must be a mess. What's new with you, Brian? Yeah.
What is up with me? I'm afraid to tell you guys because
Gonna derail the show?
There's precedent. I mean, because my life is so exciting and adventurous that that'll be the show if I tell you about it. So
my breath is now baited.
yeah. I just playing video games, watching Netflix stuff.
Okay.
I did finish Cobra Kai.
Was it good?
I was not disappointed.
It was pretty good. Yeah.
I need to watch it. I have not watched this season.
The blatant ripoffs of Rocky is so great. Miguel and his Rocky Drago moment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Looking up at him.
I've been binge watching The Rookie.
Yes. That was a show we started, a little while ago. Delaney and I, we binged it.
Yeah. Austin started watching it and he was like, Dad, you got to watch The Rookie. And so now we're watching it as a family, like in the evenings when Austin gets off work. He doesn't get home till about 8:30 because he works the evening shift. And so we usually do a little light snack. He eats dinner and then we sit down to watch The Rookie from like 9 till 11 midnight. Every night it seems like we've been watching 3-4 episodes a night.
It's funny, we've talked about this show on this show.
Oh yeah,
probably last year because Nathan Fillion is the dude, and Brian knew who he was, but had not watched The Rookie.
Yeah, I still haven't watched The Rookie, but
because he was in some nerd
Firefly.
Show, right? Yeah,
Firefly. Not some weird show. A great show.
A nerd show.
Oh, a nerd show. No, it's oh yeah, all right.
Come on.
I mean, but it's
I mean,
awesome show.
I've heard it's great, but I refuse to watch it because I understand how maddening it being canceled was. So why do that to myself?
You should still watch it. I typically describe it as Star Trek for Republicans.
That sounds glorious.
It does sound glorious.
And then I'll be that much more upset that I can't finish it. So I'm not going to watch
it. But it's like they're self-contained episodes for the most part.
And so you're not left wondering what happened.
And then they did a movie that kind of tied off some of the
Yeah.
stuff that was going on. So it's all right. I
It's
mean,
kind of
it's
like I feel like that might be the parallel to Marco Polo
Ugh.
because that was
I
a
don't think
great show.
yeah,
Man.
I don't think I watched the last season.
Nobody told me that they canceled it. So when I
Same.
started it, I was all pumped.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, that's it? It's
Yeah.
done? So, but they haven't tied up anything. Like,
Mm-mm.
like,
There was so
there's
Since
no
much.
there's no bow anywhere.
Uh-uh.
Like,
after David Lynch died last month, I started finally watching Twin Peaks because just did you guys ever watch that?
Hmm.
yeah,
Um, like I it came on like it was network TV and back in the dark ages when you had like if you wanted to watch a show you had to like plan your life around it and so
Or have a lot of VHS tapes.
yeah all the kids in school were talking about it but I never caught it and I didn't want to jump in the middle so I always felt left out so I binged it and I'm kind of mad that I did I'm kind of mad at David Lynch right now. It was just
did you watch the movie
I watched the
Fire
whole
Walk with
thing.
Me?
Yeah, I watched the first two seasons and then the movie and then the third
Oh wow, you
season.
did it right.
I did the whole thing in the order that they came out and I'm kind of mad about it. Like it's just like I was invested expecting like the weirdness would go somewhere and it just kind of
Have
like
you ever watched David Lynch's the rest of his
not
body of work?
other than Dune, not really.
Well, that
And
explains it.
he disavows Dune.
Yeah, because it made
But
too much sense.
well, the studio was too involved with it, but yeah, it was. There was a part where there seemed to be a little Aleister Crowley reference in there. Did you guys watch the series like the whole thing?
I don't
Not with,
remember it.
not
Yeah,
recently. Like
yeah, definitely not recently.
I think I was
Like
going through puberty when I watched it.
did so you didn't watch the 2017
I did watch that, yeah, but
so
I didn't remember the old stuff. So like the linkage was hard for me to remember because it was. I mean, it was
yeah.
forever ago when I watched it.
Where there was that one episode where he just sort of like drops all the information about like why all this stuff's going on like when the nuclear bomb was invented it unleashed something on the world a lot of the imagery that he's using that's straight out of Crowley's Vision of the Voice
Mm.
um which which just kind of annoyed me. Like I hate when people do occult stuff to make it seem more interesting than it really is. But
Yeah, I'll never forget. Dre convinced me to watch this movie called The Lost Highway, and easily the worst movie I've ever watched in my life up until that point.
is that
And
the one with Laura Dern and
No, that's Wild at Heart. Laura Dern and
um
Nicolas Cage. Lost Highways with Patty Arquette.
yeah,
okay.
it was that I feel like you watch that and you understand not that not that one can understand David Lynch, but you now have a good baseline for an expectation of David Lynch's work.
Matt banned me from ever choosing a movie again. Like, if we go to Blockbuster, you will not pick the movie because
Well,
it
well,
was so.
and when Dre took me, we had to go physically rent a movie back then, right? And he also made me go because there was this. He wanted me to meet the girl that worked at the movie place,
Oh yeah,
and she had a peculiar laugh.
I did not know about this.
And we started
It's
because Dre's like, "Hey, you got to meet this chick." So I'm like, "I'm gonna go meet this chick," and I'm like,
Moses.
I'm rapping to her, and she starts laughing, and I can't make the noise that she makes when she laughs because I aspirated some food the other day, and it's still down in my lung. And if I make that noise, I'm afraid that I will do more damage to my pulmonary system.
It was crazy because she was like leaning over the counter, sucking on a sucker, and I'm like, huh? And the boys were like,
Yeah.
okay. And then she's like,
She made this horrible sound when she laughed. She sounded like a baby seal.
and like these guys duck behind the
Because we're like, what's going on? And Dre's like, I didn't know she did that.
oh man.
We
Oh
were
man.
like, we were like
And then as we're
19.
leaving, she's like, guys.
Yeah, she was into it, and I was no
Like,
longer
fellas,
into it.
yeah. Lost Highway.
Huh.
Thanks, Patty Arquette and David Lynch. And Balthazar Getty.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was in the Twin Peaks
Yeah.
last
He's a Lynch
season.
actor.
Yeah.
So
But is it the reason why we have these terrible movies is because we have female pastors? It's-
I was
Gotta
about
be a
to, I was
connection.
about to
Yeah.
try some ham-fisted segue
Like, I
on this.
was- yeah. I think that's. I watched a documentary on David Lynch, and he talked about his upbringing. Yeah, a case could be made. A case could legitimately be made that maybe. Yeah. Anyway, but so
he does do some transcendental meditation though that I was gonna pay for. Learn how to do.
I think he was raised Presbyterian.
That'll
I don't
do it.
think
That'll
they
do
have.
it.
I don't think they have female
So
pastors.
what's the problem with female pastors? Why is this a
Well, so recently, I guess it was last year, maybe a year ago, there was a really big kerfuffle with the Southern Baptist Convention. There was a church in Southern California. It's one of their bigger churches. It's probably like, mega church big. And they had a female lead pastor. And they were apparently given like a cease and desist from the Southern Baptist Convention. And they called their bluff and said no. And they were, I don't know what the language is. I don't want to say excommunicated because I don't think that's an accurate term, but they were jettisoned from the Southern Baptist Convention. They were
Divested, I think.
Yeah,
is
they
the
were
term.
PNG'd. I don't know, but they're no longer part of the convention. They were deconventioned, and I know it started a lot of conversation then. I find it an interesting dialogue for sure. And I find it most interesting because of the way people come at the situation and the topic. And I think that was one of the things that we wanted to talk about. But Brian, you had something specific. Did you have something specific that brought this up, or was this just casual conversation, or just your underlying misogyny that wanted to bubble up, or like?
That usually covers most of our bases. Just
finally you and the Muslims
misogyny.
agree? I don't like
well,
there's that Venn diagram of Brian, the Muslims.
Well, the Marianne Bishop thing, the Marianne Boudet Episcopal Bishop thing.
That was the woman with Trump.
Who was preaching at Trump and Vance over there. Please stop beating your wife. Kind of sermon.
Mm-hmm.
That led to a lot of discussions on social media that I was a part of, and it kind of struck me as it's the fact that just to lay my cards on the table, if a church has a female pastor, that's my first big giant red flag that they don't take the Bible seriously. And I think so. It's no surprise that Marianne Boudet's entire worldview is it's in a Christian costume, but it has nothing to do with Christianity. It's just leftism. Put on a pedestal and worshipped as God. But yeah, that was that's why it was timely. And then that seemed to spark a whole lot of other discussions on social media related to this topic that I was a part of. And so
is that because they had a female pastor, or is it because that church leans that way and it lends credence to have a female pastor? In other words, are there female pastors out there that were highly offended at this lady's prayer.
Probably, but I generally, and I don't even want to qualify it as generally. Um,
We're getting banned from YouTube on this episode anyway, so it doesn't matter. So
well, unless you guys disagree with me and disavow and tell me what a misogynist I am, then
we
maybe YouTube will like us.
might be able to save it,
Por qué no los dos?
right? Yeah.
Why can't we have both?
Yeah, I'm totally black, so you can't kick me off.
That's true. Yeah.
So,
I'm not too proud for us to pull that card, but
Well, so let's just dive right into this, Brian. Right, like I have thoughts also. Some are well formed, some are not. Right, like so I don't know that I've created an entire theology around the interpretation, right, or what it means. And so start with this question. Paul had females that were pastors of sorts working with and for him, didn't he?
no. I mean, he had there much has been made of. Well, I should have
I
brought
think
that first up.
back up.
Hold on.
Why not?
Yeah, that's a good.
Why not?
I think we'll try to tackle the why, Matt, after.
Yeah.
No, but that question is central to the question about Paul and what he did
Okay.
is relevant because he said things a very specific way, which
Well,
lead you to one interpretation, but then when you apply it to the world that we know existed in that time, it doesn't hold quite as black and white as the words that he wrote in his letter would have one believe. That's
well,
my broad question / statement.
I can you elaborate on that a bit? I'm not sure I follow your meaning.
Paul had women, a specific woman. I forgot her name now. I looked it up and I forgot
Phoebe.
what it was. Yeah,
Phoebe the deaconess.
right. She was a deacon.
Right.
Yes.
What's
Right.
what is a deacon though?
That's part of the point is, well, what was a deacon then? Not what is a deacon now, because
Exactly. Yeah.
right.
Yeah, I do, to Dre's point, I do think we're getting ahead of ourselves. I think it's helpful just to look at what Paul said. And just go from there. Because my position is that based on what these brief verses I'm about to read, I don't think Paul left it open to debate. I think it's a pretty straightforward, cut and dry. Women should remain silent in the churches. They're not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. If they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home, for it is disgraceful for a woman to speak in the church. Or did the word of God originate with you? Or are you the only people it has reached? If anyone thinks they are a prophet or otherwise gifted by the Spirit, let them acknowledge that what I am writing to you is the Lord's command. But if anyone ignores this, they will themselves be ignored. That's 1 Corinthians 14, 34 through 38. And then there's 1 Timothy 2, 11 through 14. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet, for Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. And now, having read that, I would like to point out that to our listeners, I did not write that. I was not consulted by Paul when he wrote that. Don't be mad at me.
Are you sure you weren't consulted by Paul when you wrote that?
I'm pretty sure I would have remembered that. I mean, I was.
Okay.
I
mean, you were there. He
didn't
ask you personally.
I was drinking heavily in those days, so I didn't form a lot of long-term memories. But
okay.
but just like
this harkens back to an off-air conversation that Brian and I had.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I don't think that. I mean, I think that it boils down to does Paul have the authority to say that? Is he Jesus Christ's handpicked spokesperson or not? Because if he's not, then
I don't think that's an argument. So I don't think that's an argument to make. The question is interpretation of what he meant.
Well, those arguments are often made today.
Well, I think that's a foolish argument. I would be more interested in unpackaging what he actually said, right?
Okay.
Because does he mean in the absolute literal sense that women weren't allowed to utter an audible sound at church? Or does it mean they shouldn't be standing up and interjecting and asking questions? And the follow on is that because their husbands should be doing it on their behalf because the man was identified as the head of the house and the religious leader of the family,
What
right?
letter was that?
That was First Corinthians 14 and First Timothy 2.
So First Corinthians is pretty early. Did he evolve? And there's also some scholarship arguments that Paul didn't write Timothy.
But that's
Um,
Corinthians anyway, so he's
No,
in
no, but he
Corinthians.
said, but no, that's so my point. So my original thought was Corinthians is an early letter.
Okay,
Did he evolve?
right.
Did he change his mind? Did he
well,
did he receive a different message?
I would
And what
say
was the
that,
context of what he was talking about?
Well, and that's back
And
to the
what was
point
the
that I was.
problems in Corinth that caused him to say some nonsense? Did they have a bunch of hoes running around
Or
that
well,
didn't rate
or
to
were the
say?
women being noisy and disruptive in church,
Right.
and the men
Kind of
couldn't
kind of
couldn't control it? They were like, "Hey, we're trying to learn about Jesus here.
kind of
Can you
like
women?"
when he talks about makeup and jewelry. The point wasn't that makeup and jewelry doesn't make you worthy. The point is that when you start focusing on the things, and women aren't just these dainty creatures that wear makeup and jewelry, they are also disciples of the Lord. So you need to treat yourself as such.
Well,
well,
and that's the point that I'm trying to make. And I know, Brian, you're
Right.
trying to jump in also. I'm just trying to flesh out my point that I'm trying to bring up, and I'm happy to hear your response to it. But it's one thing to take something hyper literally, and then it's another thing to try to get to the root of what the message is that's being conveyed, right? Just like, like Dre said, the whole thing. Paul was big about the jewelry and adornments and gaudiness and all that kind of stuff, right? Gaudy, Gaud, right? Not godliness. Um, so is there an opportunity for there to be nuance there in him saying the woman shouldn't be heard in church?
well, if the, to address the question of, should women be pastors? Um,
Or we haven't got there.
well, I don't, if I'm in a church and there's a woman like making announcements, or if, or, you know,
Being the ministry, the praise leader or something, right?
yeah, or addressing the church in the context of the worship team or something like that. I'm not like, waving First Corinthians 14 in her face, and now, like,
Silence, woman, silence.
so I don't, women should remain silent in church. I don't know how strictly we need to apply
That's
that,
that's fair. That's all I
but
was getting at.
yeah,
That was the only point that I was making is there's literal interpretation, and then there's once we've moved past literal, now we're on a gradated scale of something, right? From
yeah.
left to right.
But to Dre's question about did Paul evolve and did he change his mind? I mean, he in First Corinthians 14 and in First Timothy, he appeals to universal principles, and he's quite emphatic that this is the Lord's command. I mean, if he's going to change his mind, I mean, if he's going to tell you one thing that's the Lord's command and then reverse himself later because he evolved or he grew, well, I can't really take him seriously as an authority on what is and is not the Lord's command at all after that, because he didn't really leave that option open. If anyone who ignores this will themselves be ignored. He's pretty emphatic that this is not his opinion, that it's from God himself. He's speaking at he's saying this as a handpicked spokesperson of Jesus Christ. Um, and he's appealing to standards and values that he expects them to already have. So this isn't just like some quirk of Paul's. He's appealing to the earlier scriptures, and he's saying it with the Lord's authority. And so if that you know, if that's the kind of thing that can change, then I would like that kind of calls the whole thing into question. Like, why listen to a guy at all if he's going to say this comes from God? Um, Anyone who ignores this is to be ignored, and then he changes his mind later. Um,
I think I tend to agree with you, Brian, in that that seems to be the most common counter argument that I've heard for people that are, you know, defenders of the idea of female pastors is they say, well, times have changed. You know, the world has evolved and God knows that. And I'm like, oh, he does? like I didn't know the timeless one just evolved with
yeah,
our modern sensibilities
On
and
our, yeah.
and that's and that kind of when I talked about how a female pastor, that's a symptom of a deeper problem. Um, yeah, that's what I mean. The question is, should the Bible be corrected by modern cultural values to
right.
bring it in line with our culture, or should it be the other way around? And the whole point of a religion in the first place is that this is what's eternal and
Right.
unchanging and of God.
We're
And
supposed to be working off
So
the same sheet of music, right?
right.
So I know I said evolved and changed your mind, but that was more of a question. Not that I think that he evolved or changed his mind, but I do lend credence or some kind of evidence that he elaborated on such thoughts. And I do think that the letters in all of them say different things because they address different things. And so without knowing exactly what was going on in Corinth at the time, I don't know the context of what he said and why.
Um, well, and as much as nice as it would be to have all of that, um, like I've not that you're arguing this, but the conversations I've had with people, we can call them they were arguments really.
Sure.
There's you need to understand the cultural context and the
Mm.
history at the time, and I'm like, okay, cool.
That's less in your favor, by the way.
Right.
Well, I'm like, well, cool. Fill me in. What do you got? What's the cultural context? Nobody could ever provide that, or if they could, it was something they just kind of made up in their head. It's not. There is no source that says, oh, Paul was talking to this specific situation that,
Right.
and this is the only place where this applied. No, reading the text itself, he's appealing to universal principles. Um, it isn't situationally specific. Now, of course, there's probably a situation that elicited Paul having to say that, but that doesn't mean this is the Lord's command only applies to that situation. I mean, it's kind of like yeah, you don't need to rebuke somebody for violating a standard unless you already have that standard and they're
So what was the woman's role in the 50s?
50s.
the
Paul's
50s.
letters were in the 50s.
Oh, 50s AD. I thought
first
you meant the
century.
1950s. I was like,
For
what the hell did the
1950s?
1950s have to do with this?
Hey, because that's the golden age of America. Do you understand? When
MAGA.
Captain America throws his mighty shield. So,
He was frozen in ice at the time.
in the 50s.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Okay, so the 50s, literally the 5 zeros. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
sorry.
What is the role of women?
Well,
And did they have leadership roles? And that's really what we're getting to, right? Is can a woman lead a church?
Well,
I think Paul quite emphatically says no there. And there is that, I commend Romans 16. I commend you, our
16
sister.
is the long one that greets all the women. It talks about the women doing women stuff, leading church things.
Well, leading.
Yeah.
Like what? Um, let's see what it actually says.
Phoebe, Priscilla, Junia.
I mean, he mentions women there, but what does he say about them?
well, first of all, he calls them sisters,
Yeah,
Right.
which implies sisters of the church in Christ, right? Which puts
And
them on level.
Calls them co-workers.
Right.
Right.
There is that. I mean, look, there's no arguing that Phoebe
And
specifically was a deaconess. Like Paul says in the letter, like welcome her as a sister, right?
Right.
She's a servant of the church. The question is, what does that mean? I think that's the way to kind of.
Mary, who worked hard for you. That's all he talks about him. He works hard, right? Junia,
So is leadership the only work that goes on in a church, though?
I don't I don't know what you mean by that with that question.
Well, you're you're citing this as if it's a counterpoint to, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding you. You seem to be reading this as if it's a counterpoint to what he wrote in First Corinthians 14 and First Timothy 2.
well, they're damn sure not silent.
Well, it's an amplification or
Correct.
a continuation.
Right. I don't know if it's a counterpoint. I think
Yeah.
it's a continuation. Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is this: he said this thing, which
They're
can be
obviously
taken,
important.
which can be taken literally or on a spectrum, right? But then he also said this thing over here, and knowing that he said this, you can't say, well, but this said that, so this can't be true because he said this. So this does something to inform this. It doesn't supersede it, but it somehow these thoughts have to, these different letters have to be feathered together to create that. And I agree with you that Paul was speaking universally when he spoke, and he wasn't being hyper specific and women can't be preachers in Corinth and then go over here and do something else. I agree with you. That's not what he's saying.
But when it comes to Rome, they're good to go.
Right. So all I'm saying is that is being a deaconess, does that give her, does that, like just using Phoebe specifically without getting out into multi-tangents, was she authorized to do things for women? So she was like a women's group leader and she could baptize women? Like I'm asking, I don't know, right? Chat GPT says that's what they did. I don't know. I don't know where Chat GPT gets the information from. But, and if that's the case, then when he says in the church, is he talking about in mixed company? Is that what he meant when he said that about women should be silent in church? But women can go lead other women spiritually.
Can women teach?
Right.
And I think that's one of the important things. Like, do they have the authority to teach this gospel? And and that's one of the things that helped the Christian movement to really get moving, was the fact that all creeds and colors and stations in life met in these places, and usually homes or wherever. And it didn't matter if you were a slave or if you were a Roman guard, right? You still met and taught and learned the way. Were women teaching these classes? Were women holding Bible study or Christian study?
I would say based on First Corinthians 14 and First Timothy 2, they weren't teaching men. I wouldn't think that teaching other women or children would be a violation of the standards that Paul's laying out. But
they weren't teaching men who were completely ignorant, who didn't know, who were at the baseline level. They couldn't. There wasn't levels where maybe a woman could teach a man who knew nothing.
I would guess they weren't.
What? Well,
I don't think so. I think they were.
I don't think men would have been inclined to listen to women at that time. Within the church, women were afforded much more dignity and honor than they were in the world outside the church. But like all that, I mean, we can't read Romans 16 and today the term deacon, it implies a position of some authority within a church. But we can't project that meaning back to the first century. So the term deacon as a formal title, I mean, that's kind of that's an unfortunate translation. It really just means servant. The Greek is diakonos, and it means a waiter, servant. anyone who performs any service, an administrator. So I mean, so the fact that Phoebe was a deacon, it wasn't a deacon in the modern sense. It was the sense that she was, she gave food to poor people, or like you have that episode in the Book of Acts where there was the complaint about the Hellenized Jews getting a different proportion distribution of food than the the native Jews, and then they chose seven members of the church to kind of administrate this food situation, and they were called deacons. And what's interesting is, like Peter specifically says, like the apostle, we shouldn't neglect the teaching of the word of God to wait tables.
So,
So
so kind of agreeing with what Brian just said, I Googled. I asked ChatGPT just simply what was the role of the deaconess in the early church, right? And what ChatGPT says is it varied by time and place, but essentially they assisted with the baptism of women in order to help maintain modesty because the full immersion and
Right.
wetness and whatnot, caring for the sick and needy, teaching and discipleship of women converts where men were not permitted to teach women directly, and then visiting and ministering to women. So kind of like going to their houses when they were sick and stuff, and then helping with church service, but they weren't typically involved with preaching. They played a role in it, organizing. Then it mentions Romans 16 about Phoebe. And then it says in the 3rd and 4th centuries, the role became more refined, specifically in the East, in the Eastern Orthodox churches. But by the Middle Ages, it became more male dominated. And so the deaconess role went away and they became deacons. And that's kind of where we get the modern version of what a deacon is today. It came from the Middle Ages. That's all Chat GPT. So
yeah, and in the 4th century, the church kind of became the imperial civil service, kind of de facto civil service, and so deacon took on kind of a more official role in other.
they became like the dude with the stick that whacked you when the kids were being noisy in the back. Because that's the deacon that I grew up with in the Southern Baptist Church. When the kids were off away from their parents, that deacon would come like thump you and like, "Where's your parents?" And you're like, "Oh crap, deacon got me." It was always the old crusty men.
Deacon.
Yeah, it was always the older guys that had been around, and they wanted a job and they wanted to be important, and they were deacons, and you didn't mess with deacons. But yeah, I think for the way I interpret the situation, and I think part of the problem is unfortunately we don't know. I think Brian, you said it. We don't know what Paul was speaking to, Dre, to the point that you made, right? Like content and context matters, but we don't have it. So we're kind of stuck with what we have. And I say stuck, I don't mean that in a bad way, right? What we're left with, we're told is inspired, and we're kind of required to make the best use of what we have. And to the early point that Brian made, I think it's fair to say that if we're going to sit here and start, well, things are different now, and it's different than it used to be,
which is something I would never say.
Sure, no, I wasn't putting that on you.
Yeah,
I wasn't. I'm not. This isn't. I don't.
Sure,
think,
but it is the argument.
100%.
It is the main crux of stuff that's said today in defense of
absolutely the argument I always hear is Phoebe.
And especially
Phoebe is propped up as the primary counter argument every time that I've gotten into this with somebody that knows the Bible. They go, "Well, Paul had Phoebe," and I'm always like, "He did have Phoebe." It's like it's like the scene in Coming to America. He had Phoebe.
Did she run around singing "Smelly Cat"? Is that what?
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing is I wish we had a little more, insight as to what Phoebe did. That would be fantastic.
I want to see Phoebe's scroll. Okay, where the Dead Sea Scroll doesn't have the book of Phoebe,
or the Revelation of Phoebe or something, right? Like that would be great to have.
Yeah.
What we do have is throughout the Bible, from beginning to end, there's precisely one unambiguous, inarguable, positive example of a woman in authority over God's people. That was Deborah in the book of Judges, in Judges chapter 4. and it's very strongly implied there that that this was a rebuke to the men. That it was basically because there are no men who are worthy and faithful. God has raised up a woman to judge Israel. Now, it doesn't say that explicitly, but there's an exchange between Deborah and the general Barak, who was about to go fight the Philistines, or I forget who was menacing them in this particular part.
This time.
Yeah. But Deborah is telling him, like, yeah, go, go after the bad guys, go into battle. And he's like, I'm not going to go unless you're with me.
Mhm.
And she's like, fine, I'll go, but the glory is not going to go to you. It's going to go, the glory of this victory is going to go to a woman instead of you.
I'd be like, stay home. Sit down.
Right? She's like, if you
It
got to
kinda
have me,
reminds
I'll
me
come. But just remember, a girl saved your butt.
In 2006, we were interrogating an Iraqi, and he wasn't giving up the goods. So we got our prettiest, female on the fob, let her put on some perfume, some makeup, put her hair down, and just walk into the room. And dude was so distracted he couldn't. He's like, "What is she doing here? Like, this is a chat among men." And she walked up and slapped him in the face, which offended him
Yeah,
immensely.
absolutely.
And then after a couple of slaps, he started singing like a bird. It was
I dig it.
interesting. so yeah.
Yeah, Brian, the comment about Deborah, I think that speaks to me, that it aligns with Paul's statement also, right? And I think I mentioned it early because I tipped my hand a little bit when we first dived into the conversation. I interpret his statement not to say a woman shall not lead the church. He's saying, how dare you make it such that a woman needs to or finds it appropriate? Right? Those are very
kind
different.
Of like in your house, right? Like,
Yeah,
if your
exactly.
if your wife has to step up and lead, then what are you even doing?
That's exactly it, right? And so if it's
not
happening
that
at the
she's
church,
not on your level, not that she's your best counselor, and not that she actually runs your house as well, but if you can't have a forward facing man face the world, then, and your wife has to do that, then you're not doing it right.
Absolutely. That's exactly my read, and more. And so when you take it, if it happened in a house, right? Brian likes to talk about, the microcosm thing, right? If your house is so out of order that your wife has to pray, has to lead prayer, and has to, disciple to your kids, that's for you, Brian.
Right.
Because I hate disciple as a verb.
Yeah.
Then, if it's happening at the church level, that means that's happening in every house. Right. And so that means this city is out of control because the whole place is so bad that a woman has to step up and tell all you men how to act. Like, what in the hell is going on around here? Right.
Like, the entire inner city.
That's yeah, actually,
right.
That's a whole, yeah, it is. But to me, that's my read. That's actually what I'm taking from Paul's comment in Corinthians, right? I don't think he was saying, never ever will it be holy for a woman to preach. He's saying, how do you let it get that far? How do all you men, and I'm being generous,
all these betas,
such a place that a woman finds it necessary to stand up and preach to you? Like, wow. Like, to me, that's the read.
Just because she can doesn't mean she should.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Because she's also learned, right? They also, just like in Luke, in the house, right? Mary was not in the kitchen serving the men. She was at the feet of the Lord, as like rabbi training, right?
Right.
So,
well, and there was a comment, right? I forget where it was, where one of the other disciples made a comment about he favors her more than us. Why is she around? Something to that effect. I forget the language, and I forget.
Judas didn't like that she was there, for sure.
There was a comment or two that I'm convinced happened somewhere in the one of the four gospels.
I think it's in the fifth.
Is it?
I think that's the Gospel of Thomas you're thinking of.
Okay. But I just remember
Yeah.
that happened. And to me, that's
Right.
similar to this conversation, right? Because Mary was kind of in a gray area where was
Or
almost presenting herself, not presenting like
or
like she
she
was
had to
trans.
learn the gospel because it was her role to teach all the women,
Might have been. Maybe she was a
right?
deacon, right? Like
You
that
have
was
to
the
learn
thing.
before you can teach, right? And since it's inappropriate for men to gather all women and
Right.
teach them,
Right.
you have to have women that are strong in the word.
Or
Because
she
if
was
they're not,
or she was married to Jesus.
right? Well, there's that, especially when she starts, wiping his feet down with her hair. It's pretty
That
sensual.
was a
So,
different Mary.
yeah,
I was talking about
was
I'm
it?
talking about Mary
Yeah.
I'm talking about Mary.
I don't think it was
Are
a
you talking
Mary.
about the mother?
No, the hair wiping was a different Mary, wasn't it?
I don't even think that was a Mary. That was
Yeah.
just a sinful woman came in
Yeah,
and
okay,
I don't think that was Mary.
it was Mary, but
Jamie.
it's just, but but
statistically speaking, her name was probably Mary.
Well, there was
probably
a lot
Mary.
of
It
Marys
was,
back then.
Yeah,
That's true too.
but I don't know that it was Mary Magdalene specifically. But she tends to get in all the Jesus movies, they tend to conflate all of those roles into her. So, but
I find it interesting that there are 66 books in the Bible. Exactly zero were written by a woman.
There was one in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
And even where the book is about like Ruth and Esther, written by a man. So, yeah.
okay.
But another thing I find interesting is that the resurrection of Jesus Christ is really what that hinges everything that is Christianity.
Yeah.
That's the event. And the fact that two women are the first witnesses to this and they have to be believed by men is a really incredible vehicle that the Lord uses. It, it kind of struck me. So I mean, just that fact alone, if you're into apologetics, like who would tell the story like that at that time? No one would, because no one believed these
Yeah.
chicks,
That's
right?
the criterion of embarrassment that Christian apologists
Thank
cite.
you, Brian. So, yeah. So to me, like that's kind of a big deal that the
Check out the
first
big
witnesses.
brains on Dre.
that's a so I mean, for the Lord to use the vehicle of women for the first witness
Yeah.
tells me that we get wrapped around the axle of what a pastor is and what a leader is and what roles are. And because we live in this society where we emphasize masculine roles over feminine roles in every single thing that we do, it feels like women that are given their roles or try to understand their roles feel like they're lesser, or society pushes them aside as they're lesser, when really it's just a role and it's not less or more. It's just a role. It's neutral. It's what you do. And the fact that we emphasize things that are masculine is our society's problem and not the Lord's. So when you read Paul's words, in my mind, as Brian's disclaimer, like, hey, I didn't write that, I didn't consult on that. That was Paul, who is a direct, a mouthpiece of God. So I don't think he was saying that, men are more important. He was just saying that this is what men do. And I think that's important for all the feminists out there listening to me right now. That is kind of where I go, where you're not less important, you're just different.
I think that's a great point. And I think we've been pretty consistent with that central theme when we've talked about gender specific things before on this show, right?
I think so.
That, this isn't coming from a place of misogyny. This isn't coming from a place of
I'm a mama's boy myself,
trying to
girl dad,
dominate the
right?
world
Yeah,
and all
and
that kind of stuff, right? It's just about there's a time and a place for certain things. And
I I bristle at the idea that it's something we should even have to explain or apologize for, though.
I also agree with you on that point, but I do think that let me say it like this. I think for the non-Christian, Dre's approach is the correct one, Brian. I think for a proclaimed Christian, then your approach is the correct one,
because it's
right?
automatic.
Right,
Like
like 100%.
it goes without saying. Like, duh.
Are you team God? Then that means the words in that book are beyond contestation, right? Like so, like what are we doing? Why are we arguing about
Yeah,
what the rules are, right?
and that's really my main issue with it's like I said, it's a symptom of a deeper problem. And when I see that there is a female pastor, um, that immediately tells me that church just, pardon my language, does not give a shit what the Bible actually says.
I agree
Um,
with you.
and they're, of course, they're going to protest and and offer all these kind of these arguments for how they lawyer it to say to oh, that part Paul didn't mean that, it meant something different. There's historical context. They can never explain why that is. When it when it comes right down to it, it's just that they don't like what it says. They wanted to say something different, and this kind of illustrates a recurring problem. It's kind of the whole problem with the church is that we don't really care what the Bible teaches. We're looking for a version of Jesus or a version of God that just suits what we already want to believe, and it kind of misses the whole point of a religion at all when you do that, though. When you insist that your religion has to conform to the values that you had before you came to the religion at all,
Hmm.
well, you're just worshiping yourself writ large.
Yeah, yeah. It's
But
I couldn't agree more. Like
and,
it's to think that a religion is going to be affected by the ebbs and flows of social culture is absurd at the highest level.
Yeah.
I mean, the Overton window has fuck all to do with Christianity. And I feel like that's a good
well,
quote.
it should.
I mean,
I'm gonna get that on a t-shirt.
seriously, like in what planet can you sit there and think that a being that existed before time and will exist after time is concerned about the social developments within America that's existed for, smaller than a grain of sand relative to
Yeah, and
creation?
and for
Playoffs. Like, I mean, like it actually gets me a little angry as I start to
yeah,
verbalize it and say these things out loud.
and a lot of for people like Marianne Boudet and the Episcopal Church in general, they're they would you know if they're being honest and upfront, they'll tell you they don't believe that the Bible is written by God. They don't believe that they don't believe that Jesus literally appeared to Paul. That they've got a they are what's called liberal Christians or progressive Christians. They don't they believe that Christianity is man made. They're
Which is
but
also an episode a few months back. So
Right.
look it up, people.
yeah,
Look it up.
but and but there's so basically, yeah, they do believe that the Bible needs to be corrected and brought in line with modern values
Hmm.
because now we have science and feminism and all this stuff, and these are
Science and feminism. I like how you put those two side by side.
well, that's their thinking, and they don't distinguish between the two. They think of feminism as knowledge on the same order as science.
They're trying to treat the Bible like it's the Constitution,
Right.
Um,
which the Constitution is much more rigid than
well,
we give it credit for because it's also universal principled, right?
yeah, and
Because
this is why you can pretty much, if you meet a progressive Christian or a liberal Christian, you automatically know how they vote because like there is a lot of overlap between conservatism and liberalism in politics and in theology. So they tend to that liberal theology and liberal politics tend to come together, just like conservative religion and conservative politics do. But that the kernel of truth that makes what they're saying um, palatable to some people is that Christianity is a progressive religion. in that, but they flip the order of, what is progressing, what is the question. Christianity, civilization has been progressing because of Christianity. Like, we have science and human rights and liberal democracies because of the influence of the Bible, precisely because it doesn't change. And we're, you know, as we develop, as we progress as a civilization, we become more and more in line with it. But they flip it to think that it's our values that we just kind of
Mm-hmm.
just they grew up, they're original to us, we got
Well,
them in a vacuum, and we need to conform the Bible to them. And
they also cut and paste that onto Jesus.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
just because Jesus corrected people, just because he told the modern or his day, you know, leaders that they're wrong, doesn't mean that
You get
he
to
was
do that
progressive.
perpetually, right?
He wasn't progressive. He's just laying it down, like, hey, what your way of thinking is wrong, and this is how you should think, and this is
Well, and the nature of the correction was always,
To bring it back to where it was supposed to be,
well,
not to punt the ball down the field.
well, it's typically specifically because you're exalting your traditions over the word of God.
Mhm.
Which is,
what we're trying to do with society, because our traditions, as they
yeah.
evolve or progress, we try to prioritize over those of the word of God. Like,
I shared an article into our chat. I don't know if you guys saw it, and it was about the Catholic Church has issued a definitive statement on the use of gluten-free wafers and non-alcoholic wine in its communion, right? And their position was no. We don't care if you have a medical condition that precludes your ability to consume gluten and or alcohol. You either take communion or you don't, because this is the way it's supposed to be. It like I found it hilarious because on one hand, I'm offended as a celiac person, right? But I get it because they believe in transubstantiation. They believe in some level of mysticism that evolves from the proper mixing of flour and water and yeast and God all at the same time, and you get communion, I guess. I don't know. But and somehow they think either it can't happen with gluten-free wafers or they can't be bothered to change. Either or, right? It's one
uh,
of the two.
I,
I
I'm
mean, it has to be one
I,
or the other,
I think a
right?
bit differently on this than you do.
But my point of it is they have no problem holding to what they believe is right for something like this, but yet ask them, if they're going to change socially and allow women to hold high positions, and they start waffling, right? Like that was the point that I'm making. Is I'm like, this is the where they choose to hold the line is over gluten,
hold,
right? And I'm like,
sound like William Wallace.
it's
Hold.
fine. I take communion, and I'm positive that that wafer is gluten in it, and I'm also positive it's not going to kill me. And if it does, then God
Hey,
and I'll
die
have
for
that
God.
conversation. I'm like, bro, really? Like the one time I ate gluten was for you, and like this is what you do to me? Like, whatever.
we were going to do an episode on the Lord's Supper,
We
but
we
we,
still need to. Yeah, this could be a good
yeah,
segue to it. We'll do it next week. But
yeah.
anyway, I just like, to me that was relevant to this conversation just from a, making changes or not for the right reasons, or the, hopefully, and not for the wrong reasons.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
What was your, where do you think I went astray with my wafers and transubstantiation?
Uh,
I mean, if
w-
it's worth getting into in a longer conversation, but
well, I mean, I think, if you believe in transubstantiation, which I don't, I think that's a pagan bastardization of the actual uh, practice of communion. But I mean, if you believe that it's that the that it, but if you do believe that it's being transformed into the real body and blood of Jesus Christ,
mhm.
the fact that there's gluten in it, like that,
I
you think
agree.
that
I
you
agree
think
with
that
you.
messes it up. That's
So That's why I said, but the church is only holding for one of two reasons. Either they don't think it's going to transubstantiate, or they just don't care about people with celiac because they don't want to be bothered to have two different types of wafer. It's one of the two. It can't. There's not a third option that I can think of. Unless, you know.
Yeah, I don't know what their reasoning is, to be honest.
So my only point was, if you dig down into that, they have to say, we're saying no because we don't care about you, or we don't think God can inhabit a gluten-free wafer.
And I really hope it's not number two.
I'm positive it's not number two. So the only answer can be number one.
I don't care about you.
I was being flip and setting up the either or, right? Like, there's one reason. They don't care about me.
Michael Jackson said all he wants to say is they don't really care about us.
Right?
He's right. Michael Jackson was right.
Jumi, Sumi. Kick me, kike me.
Don't you black or white
me. That gets censored. That's hilarious.
Well, we just got demonetized. Way to go.
Yes.
We got demonetized way before that. We got demonetized over the topic. The topic.
We get to say lots of stuff, but then you add Israel into it, and it's like, whoa. I can't say bad stuff about Israel. When they do bad stuff, I'm gonna say it. Like,
but they don't do bad stuff, Dre.
Oh, okay. Here we go.
So is it? Are we segueing into this now?
No, we don't have to. So
we don't have time to get into it.
In the comments, honestly, what do you think about women pastors? What do you think about women leadership in the church? Do you think our take is right? And we all have this. All three of us have the same take, but slightly different, some variations. Which who do you agree with? Whose approach would you take when you're having the conversation? Let us know. Let us know. So John, we solved it. Obviously, women should not be pastors in the
solved women church. Pastors.
We solved it, and
yeah, we solved it. Don't do it.
It hurts my ears when you do it.
To be fair, like the churches that have women pastors, they're not the only ones who just completely blow off the Bible because they don't like what it says.
It's just way more obvious.
It's a lot more conspicuous, but
this is a red flag.
It's when you walk in and go, "Are we awake? I'm not sure. Are we female?
We're awake. We're very puzzled." So. This is what you want to be when Jesus comes back. This is how you want.
All right.
Okay.
All right, we solved it. Cool.
Good show.
Good show, guys.
So yeah, give us some feedback. This was semi-controversial and fun, and some jokes were made, and we didn't make enough feminist jokes, so I'm kind of disappointed. I'd
be really interested in our female viewership's opinions.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean that genuinely. I know there's a couple of you out there, and at least two, maybe three, four. We might be up to five.
We might be up to a baker's a half a dozen.
A baker's half a dozen. Five and a
baker's
half.
half a dozen.
We have binders full of women listeners.
We have gaggles.
Easy
Remember Mitt
Romney. Yeah.
So with that, I will say, stay enlightened, stay curious, and we're going to talk to you next week. God bless.